three black males come in, and three males come in, and the first one is dressed almost like an overcoat, shirt, tie, little bit older, looks, didn't think anything of it. And then the other two kids were behind him, and the one kid in behind says, "Hey, is Detective Will in?" And my mind goes back to that phone call of Detective Mike Wills and foreman coming in to pick up a witness voucher. And the next thing I know, the kid in front with the long overcoat, kid to me now because I'm like almost 60 years old, but I mean, back then I was only 29 or something, maybe I was 30, but he pulls out a Cobra M11 machine pistol, long magazine, and depresses a trigger and starts firing.
Welcome to Game of Crimes. Hey, let me ask a question here real quick, too, because there's an interesting jurisdictional question here because in the federal statutes, I mean, back at that time, there was no federal statute for just like a murder. The FBI had no authority to make arrests and investigate murders, but DC being a special district. So when it came to charging, you'd get somebody on this. Even though you guys would help make the case, did that all get charged through then the DC Metropolitan Police through their court system, or how much of that could you take federal?
Yeah, that was wild. I mean, we papered cases in the DC system. You learned, you did the like PD 123s, I think they were called, their form, like their report of investigation. Everything was recorded, or you did you typed it. Like their statements were like, what did you see next? You have put it in, and then what their exact answer was. I mean, you did everything on pretty much DC. It was on DC paperwork, and everything went through DC Superior Court. But you testified as a witness, or you would your detective partner would help you paper that case, or you would just jointly put that thing together, the case file, and present it to the U.S. attorney. They were U.S. attorneys in Superior Court, but they were, but they were Superior Court attorneys doing it in the state system.
Can you explain what you mean when you say paper a case?
Yeah, I mean, paper in a case was like the instead of like in the federal system, you do a complaint and then an indictment and you do discovery. I mean, DC is a police department, and they have a whole set of separate and different forms that have grown up through their court system and through their department, and basically that's what there's certain things. And I don't recall everything now, but I mean, there's certain, things that you had to do before you presented that to a court and present to the attorneys, to the prosecutor's office to file that charge.
So you're basically documenting your investigation and showing what evidence you have to corroborate what you're claiming.
Yeah, but you're filling out DC Metro Police
Right.
paperwork as opposed to the FBI 302, and everything else, right?
Yeah.
See, I even knew the name. It's a 3.
You can't throw a 302 out there and not explain it, Morgan.
Well, how do you define a 302? 302? No, 302. He knows better than I do, but it's their narrative report, of investigation.
It's a witness summary. Yeah, it's a like DEA does a DEA 6, right? Is it a 6? It's a report of investigation, whereas the FBI does a separate FD 302 for every, like if I interview Mazurfi,
Mazurfi, faux shizzle. That's right.
if I do Mazurfi, I will do it on a 302, and but I wouldn't interview. And then if I interview you, that goes on a separate 302, and it's just a summary. It's not exact transcript, but there's rules to it. Like if someone makes a quote, "Yes, I killed Joe Smith," you would put that.
You'd like to get that in a quote, yeah.
Yeah, and I always actually, as I went through my career, I recorded the subject interviews. I was all for recording, and then the Bureau allowed it for a while, and then they pulled it back, and then they stopped it, and then I would just take a state officer with me and hit the record button, and as the plea facilitator, because if you had a full confession on tape, man, there's and you I don't know why the FBI was so intent on not
Well, it's
recording.
because it's the I don't know, but I have my theories having worked down at DOJ on a big information
And
project, but
that was it. It was a DOJ policy.
it was DOJ. But but there is an advantage though to recording things from an investigator standpoint because you keep the flow going, you keep the questions going because if you have to stop and write something down, it
Mhm.
breaks the flow. And so I loved recording stuff because you could you might make a couple notes like say, okay, ask about something, something pop into your head, you'd write it, get it out of your head. But I love doing the recordings. But to your point, you get their you advise them of their rights, you get their waiver on tape. I always used to do that, and then I'd get done. I'd always recap it. I say, "Hey, do you remember when I brought you in, right? I
Yep.
advised you of your rights. Remember when you said you understood them? Remember when you waived your rights? You said you talking to me without an attorney. Now, has anybody beat you, whipped you, thrown a grenade at you? You kind of make it. Oh no, 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 everything's fine. Did we bring you water? Did we give you a break and everything? Once you get that done, I had one guy try to take that series of burglaries and stuff to court, and once we started playing the tape, I mean, the convictions, he tried every case separately, but it took the jury 5 minutes to convict this guy. It took him 15 minutes to fill out the paperwork. It's like, to your point, but I digress. Drinking game, that's number 4. So back to you.
No, no, I'm with you on that. I mean, are you under the influence of drugs or alcohol? If I or any member of law enforcement threatened you, and it protects the
The integrity
investigator
of the
Right.
as
investigation
much
and
as
of
it.
the admission. Yeah.
And like you said, hey, look, there's plenty of guilty people out there. We're not here to convict the innocent. Note to
Right.
our politicians and stuff. But I mean, it's like, yeah, I mean, it's like you just want to, and it really keeps the system flowing because it is a plea agreement facilitator if you have a full confession voluntarily made.
And rock solid, recorded on audio. It's like it helps grease the wheels of justice and moves things along faster because to your point, you have the respected defense attorneys, they're going to go, yeah, they're going to talk to their client, go, hey, look, dude, I can tell you from experience, this is not going to go well if you want to argue this in front of a judge. You get past your preliminary, your evidentiary hearings, they admit everything. Once everything's admitted, it's like, okay, now let's talk plea. But anyway, back to you though. So you're on this squad, you're working these things as you start working up. So the question I wanted to ask you though, during that time, you were having all these homicides. What was their clearance rate, if you remember? For every, were they solving 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10? Do
It
you
was
remember?
it was low. I'd have to look that up nowadays, but I mean, it was really low. It was really low, and
Which meant
and
the
we knew it
cold
was
case squad, you guys had a lot of cases to work on.
plenty of cases, and and as part of like the FBI's role in that, we would come in, would do triage, and then go out with the detective. So like, I usually your detectives in court all day on different cases, and then I met up with them, late afternoon, early afternoon, and then you'd basically work the streets at night. You'd go out and find witnesses, and if I go to that fateful day, of the shooting, I mean, that's exactly what was happening. I mean, my detective partner, the late Lauren Ledman, he was over in court with Mike Will, and I got into so we had the FBI office at the old Buzzards Point, and then that's where the FBI squad supervisor was at Dixon, and still really good friend, great guy, and everybody was over there, and it was the old bullpen, effect where you had a bunch of desks. It wasn't like these new FBI offices; they're like nice, shiny with pictures on the wall and cubicles, and they look like corporate office spaces. But back then, it was like a bunch of like prison-made furniture by the from of like these
I
old
Prison
steel
remember that.
desks and
industries, yeah.
stuff, right? Yeah,
Those
prison
old metal
industries.
desks.
Smashed together, and there's no privacy, and but there was a point of that, when you talk about intelligence and all this stuff, I mean, everybody kind of knew if you're talking, oh, hey, wait, you were talking about, whatever, I got a source or whatever, what I mean? And that's kind of like this open concept that people don't understand. And it was like something out of the movies, where it was just this awful, decrepit building with a bunch of desks smashed in there. And that's how we operated. But I would get into work later, bureaus like 8:15 to 5, but it's like I would take care of our new daughter, our daughter at that point. She's now married and living overseas, but with a great son-in-law. But then she was like 8 months old, right? And my wife would go off to work. We kind of almost had split shifts, right? I would take care of Anna, get her ready. And then we had a lady come in and watch her. And then I would leave sometime I'd get in like late morning, early afternoon, and then I work late into the night with the detectives. And that day in particular was like any other day. I got up, took care of her. Holly came, took over, and then my wife would come home later.
Hey,
From
bookmark as
work.
far as we talk about this day. Now let's get specific. Date. So the day gets the day and year. When did this
Yeah,
happen?
November 22nd, 1994. All right. Starts like any other day.
And how long had you been on the bureau?
I graduated from the academy August. Was it August 14th of August
91?
14th, 91? Yeah, so I'm only in a couple years. I mean, I did a year on C6, and then a year on this one. And I did those couple months on the applicant squad, give or take like a half year or so on the applicant squad. So I mean, I'm
Still
young.
relatively new.
Yeah, I'm new. I'm a rookie, in the scheme of things, right? Um, and so I get into the field office and over to the Buzzards Point, and you did back then. We didn't have, I think we had Airtels and stuff. We didn't have teletypes, and we didn't have you didn't have email. You didn't have. I think the internet was pretty much in its infancy. You had computers, obviously, but you still had the IBM Selectric typewriter for certain documents. Remember the old, what was that? They were like carbon, you'd type on a sheet and then you'd pull it and you'd have the sheet underneath it was the copy.
Yeah. They had those forms too that where it was carbonless copy, but you could type on it and it would,
Yes,
yeah.
yeah.
And to get all that stuff all over your fingers and yeah.
Even then, we were so much more efficient. We had a dictation, a steno pole that you would just dictate into a magnetic tape, and then you would send your stuff to the steno pole, and it'd come back and you'd correct it. We didn't type our own stuff. I mean, I remember and that's I think where the bureau lost a lot too. It's like if you were sitting at your desk and you were typing something,
You weren't solving crime.
That's exactly right. Your supervisor was on your tail, and what are you doing? We have people to do this. You're not hired and not paid by the U.S. government to sit around and type. Get out on the street and interview somebody. Go find an informant.
Go knock on doors.
Something. That's exactly right. And that's how the bureau used to be. By the time I retired, it wasn't that way anymore, and it hadn't been for a while. But I mean, that's the way it was. And I mean, I think if you probably put the numbers up and the level of cases that we were able to solve back then, I mean, it was pretty monumental. But I digress. So I got over the field office that morning, November 22nd, or late morning, maybe closer to noon. And Martha was there, Mike was there. A lot of the squad mates were over there, and you did administrative FBI stuff that you had to do. And then I transitioned. I would go over to DC Metropolitan Police Headquarters, which was in the area where like the U.S. Attorney's Office was there. That was right next to the federal courthouse, across the street from DC Superior Court, Indiana Avenue. I mean, it was kind of, it wasn't far, like a stone's throw from the Capitol building. I mean, it's like off the mall a little bit on the north side of the mall, but it was an area at that time. Now you have the, where the I don't know if they still call it the Verizon Center, but it's the where the Capitol's playing stuff. I mean, that whole area has been completely. Back then, it was a no man's land, probably from the still burned out buildings from the '68 riots, from just north of there all the way up to Chinatown. And all Chinatown was just the one street. I think it was like G or H Street. And then north of there was another no man's land. It was pretty much like open air drug markets, and just you didn't want to walk around there, and that's how it was. That was kind of the edge of the downtown DC area. Now, I mean, that area is like spectacular with outdoor cafes and restaurants. And
yeah, I think it's called it's the Capital One Arena now, formerly the Verizon Center. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, that's a beautiful area down there now.
Now, back then it was a no man's land. It was just, if you parked too far off that street, your car would likely get broken into. It was just it was rough. I mean, no one would be caught dead up there after at night, in the streets surrounding it. But that's where DC Police headquarters were, and even back then there was no metal detectors. But even as bad as that city was, I always say, and I've said this a million times, but for this incident to happen inside DC Police headquarters, like hallowed ground, filled with, I don't know how many police officers at that point, but it would be like lightning striking on a sunny day. It just, even as bad as DC was, you wouldn't think this would happen. So I go over, and the cold case office, to kind of set what this area looks like. It's probably a 1920s, maybe early turn of the century granite faced building, big granite building. I think it's about 6 stories high, maybe. And on the top floor would be the DC police chief and the command staff, and that whole command staff. And then there was a multi-use building, though. So you had state probation, or DC probation was in there. You had driver's license bureau was on the first floor. You had a lot of unrelated to policing type offices on the first, maybe second floor in that building at the time. No metal detectors. And if you think like you're looking down, right? If you're at Google Maps and you're looking down satellite imagery, right? This building is a big square. In the middle of it is hollow. So if you're looking straight down, there's a big courtyard in the middle, and all the offices are built on the exterior of this square. Does that make sense?
Sounds like an Embassy Suites.
Yeah. And it goes up, 6 stories. So if you're on the 6th floor, you can look down all the way down to the courtyard on the first floor.
Well, it's kind of the way the DOJ building is, right? You've got the square in the middle, and everything's built around. You can look inside the interior courtyard.
Yeah, and the interior courtyard is a lot smaller there, and you couldn't get onto that courtyard. But basically, so you walk through the front entrance, you walk to the other side of the hallway, and there's an elevator that takes you up to took me up to the 3rd floor. And on the 3rd floor, you get off that elevator, and the first office you see is the desk sergeant for main homicide, and then you see main homicide, and then DC had 7 police districts at that time, and each police district had their own homicide. There's main homicide, and then 7, so 1D, 2D, 3D, all the way up to 7D came around that corridor. So if you get off the elevator and you walk right, desk sergeant, main homicide, 1 through 7 police districts, sex offense, sex crimes, special victims unit. That was on that floor also.
What was the difference between main homicide and the other districts? Were they like RHD, robbery homicide? Did they take over certain cases, or
they took over certain cases, and I think back in the day, prior to there being 400 some 472, 482 homicides, it was more designed like that, where they so they did more the bigger. The
high
related
profile
cases, high profiles, significant cases, and stuff like that. And in that main homicide was the captain of homicide, Hennessy, who's I don't know if he retired, but I think he's still a Prince George's County judge after he left the department. And then Captain Hennessy, and then you go around, and on the almost like a mirror image on the other side of the building, around the corridor. So I'm going to say, just for, I don't know if it's north or south, but we'll say main homicide's on the north side. We're on the south side corridor of that building going around is the cold case squad. And we're kind of down. There's not a lot of empty offices between us and the last one, which was 7D. And that's where our office was located. Our office, when you walk in the door, it had a cipher lock on it. The old push button cipher lock wasn't electronic, and that kind of comes relevant in the story, but there's a cipher lock on it, and then you walk into a main big room, and that's, again, the bullpen, just like, the prison furniture, the old, used court furniture and things like that, all smashed together, and everybody had a desk in there. So FBI task force working on the task force had it, and then the cold case DC homicide detectives had a desk in there. to the far right end of that main big room was my detective partner, Lauren Ledman. That was his desk. And then directly across from him was Mike Will's desk, who was the detective. And they were both in court that day. I was the first one to get there. So I come in the office, I'm by myself. And the other part of this, so there's a large, wait, sorry, the dog's drinking. Hold on.
That's all right.
We're a pet
Oh,
friendly show. If you've seen my
Yeah.
cats come across here, meow. We were recording something. Here I go. I digress for a minute. We were recording a Patreon episode yesterday, and Murph could hear my cat through my closed door all the way out in the kitchen meowing,
how
wanting
funny is that?
attention. Yeah. So we're a pet friendly show. So
No, that's cool. But yeah, the other one's sunning himself out there, so he'll start barking when he wants in. But anyhow, I hate to keep interrupting. So back to the layout of this building. So you have the large office, and then to the left of that large office is like that old like that rug wall, like modular furniture wall kind of stuff that you make cubicles out of. That's what separates the office to the right, the main office, with the office, smaller office to the left. And so you come in the main door, you come in the main, you come into the main part of the office. There's some chairs sitting there, like a little seating area. And then if you were to go left through that modular rug wall type opening, there was like almost like cubicle furniture made like a little kitchen area. People kept their lunch, that 1D, 2D, all those districts, guys kept their lunches in there because there's a refrigerator there. And there was, coffee maker in there, and people put quarters in for a soda and stuff like that. Continuing through that little modular made kitchen, you came into the little room, and directly on, we'll say, the west side wall is a sofa. Behind the sofa is that interview room where we used to do subject interviews and bring witnesses in and record. And so if you're sitting on the sofa, to your right is a desk, and to your left is a desk on the other side of the armchair, if that makes sense. So that's kind of the overview of how that cold case squad was set up.
how many people? How many people would that area hold comfortably at one time? How many people would be working in that
In that little
squad?
room,
Yeah.
Oh, the little room on was only Hank Daly had a seat. He called that his office. Hank Daly was a detective sergeant in charge of the cold case squad. He was like the FBI supervisor, but for the DC detectives, and then we had our supervisor Ed Dixon over at the field office, but he was his equal in the scheme of running the case. But that was just Hank and another desk, and then that sofa, and then the interview room. So really, there'd only be like 2 or 3 people back there at any given time, or it was really crowded. I mean, to give you the area, if Hank, well, I'll get into that, but not to get too far. So I come in the office, I go in the main part on the right. I sit down at Lauren's desk, and I start going through, he's in court with Mike Will. I start going through case files and figuring out, and this is the old school, before internet, before Google Maps, you had to have the old books and figure out addresses and things of that nature. And I was going through the case file and trying to line up like what witnesses on what we were working, and what witnesses, and identifying where their addresses are and things like that, from the old hard books and stuff like that. And I was just kind of lining up the evening while he's in court. And then Martha comes in. She goes and sits in the main room at her desk, which is kind of opposite, more closer to the door, the front door, the main door. And then, but on this side of that makeshift wall, and on this side of the little room.
So, and in the main room, how many people would that hold as well, too? How many people could be working in there?
There's probably could be up to, I'm going to say probably about 20, 25 people could be in there. This is just a bunch of desks just smashed together, no walls, nothing in between, right? The old filing cabinets and things of that nature. So Martha comes in, and then Hank Daly, the detective sergeant, comes in, and he walks back to my desk and starts talking to me, and and Hank was he was like again, another legend, but like, here's a guy, I think at that point he was like 27 years, and he could have retired. Um, and Hank was just full of stories, and he was like a walking encyclopedia, not on just investigative knowledge, but everybody in the city. He worked his way up from street cop, probably in the late 60s, all the way early 70s, all the way up through to, running this cold case squad as detective sergeant, and just a wealth of knowledge. Like, you could give Hank a name, and then, oh yeah, his name came up in whatever shooting, or, his mama is this person, or, his cousin is this person, or he's related to this group. And like, gangs in DC are not like Crips and Bloods, right? They called them crews, right? And they basically were crews based on street corner blocks. There was the First and Kennedy Street crew that they ran the drug trade on that little area, of that little corner of DC. And that's kind of how DC was split up, with these little drug crews that were, menacing the people that lived there.
And Murph, I think, who were we talking? Which episode was it? I don't know. Maybe if it was Dominic when he was doing those cases there, because we talked about that. I mean, we thought there'd be a lot of Crips and Bloods, but DC was very territorial. So we had Dominic Polifrone from ATF, and it's like there weren't these outside gangs that were in there. They were very territorial, like you said. They were neighborhood gangs, which kind of made it unique because they were all homegrown. There was no national gang and no national leadership you could point to, right?
Yeah, and they were very, very. I'm sorry, was Murphy going to answer? I'm sorry about that.
Nope, I'm with you.
Yeah, I mean, they were very territorial is the right term. These are kids that all grew up together. They stayed in that neighborhood. They controlled the drug trade in that neighborhood. They fought. Got in shootings if somebody was if the next neighborhood over, was encroaching on their territory, they would get involved in shootings with them. They would, and again, that's where a lot of the violence would come from. The First and Kennedy Street crew, were in running gun battles, and in fact, a little bit about them. There was one specific case. It was, pretty awful, just like a lot of the depravity that was going on in DC at the time. But this, woman, Northeast DC, single mom, puts her kids in the car seat, going to take them to daycare on her way into work in downtown DC. And she's driving around North Capitol Street, and this, First and Kennedy gang members getting a running gun battle with a neighboring crew, from a different neighborhood that had been encroaching. And they, had this running gun battle, and the woman's sitting at the red light, and boom, the bullet, pierces the passenger side window and, goes into her head with her, kids in the back seat. And that's the kind of stuff that was, going on.
Heartbreaking.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was just extremely violent groups of, like, there's almost like Lord of the Flies writ large with guns and crack. I mean, it's just that's what DC was. So, going back to that fateful day, Hank comes over, starts talking to me at Lauren's desk, and he's like, "Hey, come on back to my office," and he considered his office that little room on the other side of the makeshift cubicle walls. You couldn't see over the top, I mean, it was separated, but you could probably hear what's going on over there. And it's all separated. So we go back, and Hank sits at his desk. I sit on the sofa outside the interview room. And then Mike Miller comes into the office at some point, and he sits at that desk opposite of Hank. So my back's to the wall. I'm sitting at the sofa. Hank is at his desk to his right. Mike is to my left. If the three of us stood up, we could all touch hands in the middle. That's how close this area is, just to give you some kind of perspective. Very little opening between Mike's desk and Hank's desk. They're both facing each other, probably a few feet, away from each other, but enough to like walk through and get to that sofa. Interview room, door opening is behind me. So we're talking, Hank's telling war stories. We're talking about whatever case was going on. And I remember at the time there was a cold case just took over there was a series of, again, like a red ball case, I mean, even though it wasn't a cold case, but it was related to a group of cold homicides. This is the same group believed
You
to be
said
involved.
red ball. What does that mean?
Like a high priority, high
Okay.
priority case, right? So there was a series of armored car robberies in where the robbers just shot the guards, no reason, just to, that's just how life was cheap in DC. And there was one that happened actually not far from my wife's office at that point, up on like the area of like 18 and M, where like all the law firms and accountants and lobbyists and all those places were, nowhere was safe really. And that was, we had got pulled that, just before November 22nd. And it was um, and actually me and another detective went out and did an interview that, of a cooperating witness and, identified, who was involved in this. And there's a bunch of old homicides, and that's why the cold case got it. And so the whole squad was working it. And Hank was, talking about, different things. And Hank was an education, right? I looked at Hank like a teacher. Even Mike, even though he was second office agent, looked at Hank as a teacher. The guy was just filled with knowledge, and you could pick his brain. And it's downtime in the office. It's I'm waiting for Lauren to get out of court. Let me digress, because this is important. Before Hank comes in, before Martha comes in, I get a phone call over the main line. I pick up the phone, and the person's voice on the end of the phone, young man, he says, "Hey, is Detective Will in?" Detective Will is the detective who's over in court with Lauren. I said, "No, he's not here." He's like, "Hey, can you check?" It's a couple of days before Thanksgiving, right? November 22nd. He says, "Can you check his desk? He's supposed to have a witness voucher for me, like a informant payment of some type, like on DC paper." Gives me his name. I don't know what the name is, but whatever he tells me on the phone, I get back on the line. "Yeah, it's here." He says, "Okay, I'll be by in a little bit to pick it up." Okay. So that's in my mind, right? I'm there by myself. I'm putting the case, what we're going to do that night together. I get a phone call. Kid says he's going to come over to pick up this witness voucher. Okay, think nothing of it. Martha comes in. Hank comes in. Hank and I go back to Hank's office, what he calls his office, that little area, that other room. Mike comes in. We're all sitting around talking. That's where I'm at the story. Different, like I said, different officers, detectives on that floor there was a cipher lock, but it was like an old door from the 1920s that you really had to pull shut. It was like warped at that point. And people would leave it jammed open intentionally because they'd come in and out and not use that cipher lock. And they would go back and they'd get coffee in that little makeshift kitchen between the main room and the little room that I'm in with Hank and Mike. And, people were popping their head. I remember at one point, like Jay Abbott and Jerry Bammel, who were on the squad, they pop their head around the corner, and they're talking to Mike, Hank, and I. Martha's in the other room. And then they leave, come and go. The next thing that happens is three black males come in, and three males come in, and the first one is dressed almost like an overcoat, shirt, tie, little bit older, looks, didn't think anything of it. And then the other two kids were behind him, and the one kid in behind says, "Hey, is Detective Will in?" And my mind goes back to that phone call of Detective Mike Will's informant coming in to pick up a witness voucher. And the next thing I know, the kid in front with the long overcoat, kid to me now because I'm like almost 60 years old. But I mean, back then I was only, 29 or something. Maybe I was 30. But he pulls out a Cobra M11 machine pistol, long magazine, and depresses a trigger and starts firing.
Is this automatic or semi-automatic?
It's automatic. It's illegally possessed, because I'll tell the rest of the story, but he is a felon, and it was illegally owned and manufactured to fire full auto. So he does it would be like a 360, right? Hits Hank first, spins, hits one of the informants as the kid's hightailing out of the room. The other informant would have ran in front of me. I didn't see that, but he ran past me and went into that interview room behind me and ducked under the table while the shooting was going on. Hits Mike as Mike's sitting, does a real quick spin. We're talking like probably milliseconds at this point, right? Like a 360 turn, depress the trigger, bullets flying. I see Hank go down. Hank's hit multiple times. I see Mike go down behind the desk. Training kicks in. I always carried my firearm on my side, as you're trained to do. And thank God I didn't have like an ankle holster on or a fanny pack like we used to carry back then. But like I'm like, because I think automatically, you're trained, your hand, I'm right-handed. So my hand goes to my holster on the right. And thank God it was there and I didn't have it on some ankle holster where I'm trying to figure out, you know what I mean? Because, a matter of seconds would have made all the difference, right? But as I immediately, couple things happen. None's got to me early. I'm a practicing Christian. I was raised Catholic, but I started saying Hail Marys and Glory Bees, and I instinctively go to my firearm in my right holster and draw my firearm, and I start to get up and engage the shooter as he does a 360. Hank, informant, Mike. Now he's turned to me and he's firing at me. And as I'm getting up from the sofa, I'm firing at him and I'm starting to move backward to the other armrest. So he's at the, we'll say if right and left, right? If I was sitting, say, in the middle, or I was probably sitting closer to Hank. But he goes to the top armrest. I'm at the bottom armrest of that sofa. There's a wall to my right. There's a wall to my left. Hank is to my right. Mike is slumped below the desk. It would have been, behind the shooter, or like off to the right of the shooter. So I just, there's no take and aim. I mean, it's just like point and try to pull that trigger as fast as you can down at the threat, at the target. And I can't get the bullets out fast enough. And I can feel bullets hitting me. So one hits my upper chest, one goes through my bicep. And then the one that did the most damage, I guess, hits like a graze wound, my neck. I had a graze wound on my left arm. It's probably more than a graze wound. I went through the bone, but it kind of carved out a piece of the bone. And then I'm just firing this. We had a SIG 9mm, was a 226 back then, is what we were issued before Glocks, which I actually fired the Glock a lot better. But I'm just firing, trying to get as many bullets out as I can, and I just can't pull that trigger fast enough. And if I break it down into, it was like everything was on like super fast forward, right? But I could break down in my mind almost like frames of a film clip, right? Exactly what was happening each moment, right? And then as I'm backing up, shooting at him, he's shooting at me. I'm getting hit. I know I'm getting hit. The bullets didn't hurt. It was like a piercing, burning feeling, but they didn't hurt at that point. Although I know I'm getting shot, And then the one that hits me in the chest, and that's the one that did the most damage. And I was like, it's like almost like a balloon inside of you pops, right? And that actually went through the pericardial sac into my, I think it's the left, I'd have to look it up medically, but I think it's the left atrium. It's your low pressure chamber. And that's probably the only reason why I lived. That and a lot of prayers and medical science advances. But, it went through my heart, then through my lung, then traveled down through my liver, which grows back, and then took out part of my kidney. And that bullet still actually they didn't pull it out. It's still like in there. But so when that happened, I knew that was serious, right? And I knew, like, I thought to myself, I got to get down. I got to get lower, get down, and again, I'm praying, firing bullets at this guy, and I am and I'm getting hit. And I think to myself, I gotta get down. The moment I thought like, hey, I gotta get down, that's when the bullets hit my right leg, and that was up to this point. I felt like like I said, like the balloon popped, and I knew it was serious, but it still didn't hurt. You know what I mean? But when I hit my leg, that was excruciating pain, and it shattered my femur, and like it looked. If you look at the X-rays afterwards, I mean, it literally looked like you could take a bite out of an apple, and that's what my femur looked like, and it was shattered in multiple places, and and I hit the ground. I fell. My legs came out from underneath me, and now I'm laying out prone, and my head is underneath the armrest, and I can't see, and I'm laying on the ground, and I just basically reached my firearm up over the armrest, and I just kept cranking runs until I lost consciousness, right? And I was firing like where the threat last was, and I'm in and out of consciousness. I hear gunfire, not in my immediate area, as I'm coming to at one point, and you have the smell of the range, almost like that acrid smell of gunpowder, and your ears are ringing. Never stop praying, and I can hear that gunfire, not in my immediate area. And that would have been, I can see what was going on because it was in a different room, but he's engaged in the gunfight with Martha in the adjacent room. The next thing I'm in and out, I think to myself, hey, okay, he's coming back to finish us off. I look and I can see I didn't fire the lock back. And, for people who aren't familiar with firearms, it's a semi-automatic pistol, which you put a magazine in the receiver or in the handle, so to speak, and it between the propulsion of the gunpowder and the explosion with the pin hitting the bullet, and it causes an explosion, and also the mechanical spring pushes another bullet from that magazine, what people call clips, but it's really a magazine, and the handle pushes it up into the firing chamber and to fire back. And then when you fire, it opens a chamber up, and then it kicks out a bullet, and then it closes. And I knew, looking at my SIG, that I had not fired. And when you are done with all your bullets, when you fire the entire magazine, it locks back and it's open. So you put in, to put in another magazine with bullets. And I knew that, looking at my SIG, that I hadn't fired the lockback. So I had bullets left. I didn't know how many I fired. And I think the final Bureau reports that I got 12 rounds off at them. But
how big were the magazines? I think those the 15 or 17? 15.
Yeah, we had the 15, and then you put one in the chamber. You always were one in the chamber, so it carried 16. So next thing, again, I'm in and out of consciousness, and I hear a woman detective's voice on the other end. Now, this little room has a door to my right that's behind Hank, and it's almost has a filing cabinet beside it, real close to it, and that door is never used. You want to go in or out of that room of the homicide cold case squad, you got to go through the main door in the other room. There's a little door that went out to the hallway from the other room, but that had a big slide bolt over it. It was always locked. No one used it, and that backed up to Hank's desk. Hank's laying there. Won't describe it, but he's hit really bad. I hear this, and it's this old 1920s building. So there's like a metal grate, prior when they had air conditioning or whatever, probably to get airflow through the building. There's this thick metal grate that you couldn't bust through on the bottom of it. And I hear this woman's voice on the other side, click, 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 and she's like, "We can't get the door open." And my mind goes back to several weeks before. I was out with my detective partner, Lauren Ledman. I'm going to digress here for a second. But my mind goes back to when I was out with Lauren. It's a Friday night. We're done. We'd been out doing interviews, hitting the streets. And then we come back, and Lauren goes home. He drops me off, and I at my car, and I figure, hey, I'm going to go upstairs, and I left my jacket up there, and I left some things up in the cold case office. So I go up there. Place is pretty empty at that point. It's a Friday night. People are all out doing whatever. And I get up to the cold case squad, and I get to that cipher lock. The door's closed. Nobody's in there. The office is empty. And I hit the numbers on the cipher lock, and it doesn't work. Okay, I guess they changed locks. I go down to that desk sergeant, main homicide, on the other side of the building. I ask him, hey, they changed the locks. Yeah, I don't know what it is. Go to main homicide. Don't know. Go to 1D, 2D, all the way around the building, hit all 7 police district homicide offices. Hey, anybody know what they changed the number to? No. This is back in the early days of cell phones. We had to pay for our own cell phones back then in the Bureau, right? 1994. And and we had pagers. Remember the pagers, But I start calling people on the squad. I don't think we had automatic dial on those old cell phones. You had to look up on a little sheet of paper you had written in your wallet, And I start calling people on the squad, and I go through just about the whole squad, and I think I get to Jerry Bam or Sukos or somebody, and they're like, "Oh yeah, they changed that. Here's a new number I got in." But bottom line is, it took me 45 minutes on that Friday night to get into that office, right? So I'm laying there. I know I'm hit seriously. I know I'm having trouble breathing. I'm tired. I'm going to fall asleep. I know I got to stay awake, because if I close my eyes and fall asleep, as easy as that's going to be, I'm dead, right? And I think to myself, I got a wife, I got an 8-month-old daughter home. I'm not dying here. And I hear this woman's voice say, we can't get the door open. They probably don't know what the damn cipher lock is. And it took 45 minutes for me to get in. I can only imagine what it's going to take them to get in. So all my power at this point, I crawl, kind of, almost like a snake, or get, Hank is there. I have to crawl up to that door, and my leg is in pain. It's the most excruciating thing I've ever felt. And I know it's like I'm having trouble breathing. I know it's almost like I'm drowning inside, is what it felt like. And I get up to that door, and I try the first time. I try to get up, and I use my weight, and I fall back, and I fall down. And I can hear, click, click. And then they're asking me my name, and, I'm calling out, officers down. I throw out 10 code, officers down, officers need assistance, Mike, Hank, I didn't know what happened with Martha. She was in the other room, but at that time I was calling out, we've all been hit. I give the description, 3 blackmail and subs, because I didn't know the informants, whether they were involved or not, but I just described what I saw. And second time, I take all my power, and I put my weight on that slide bolt on the door, and I slide it with all my weight open. I'm still kind of hanging on the ground, but I reach up and I slide with all my weight, and I slide that slide bolt open. And then I turn the knob of the door, and then boom, it blows open. And then 3 detectives rush into the room, and it's Brian Cowan, Chris Kaufman, and Neil Trugman, 3 DC homicide detectives, no bulletproof vest, just happen to be walking through the hallway. They respond. All this mayhem's going on. They don't know what's going on. They don't know what's on the other side of the room, but they're, again, you talk about I owe a debt of gratitude. I owe it a debt of gratitude, because, again, weren't waiting for a SWAT team to come in. They weren't waiting. They knew we were on the other side, and they bust in that door and rush in. I get pulled out. Hank gets pulled out. They didn't see Mike, unfortunately. He was behind a desk. Next thing I know, I'm being pulled by my my shirt around my shoulders. I'm being dragged down the hallway super fast, and they're dragging me down the hallway, and they get me to a room. And I said, call priest. I'm a Catholic. I said, I'm not going to die. So I got daughter and 8-month-old wife and 8-month-old daughter at home, and then they get me on the floor, and I know they're working on me. They rip my shirt off. They put a cellophane on me, on my chest, and I'm really having trouble breathing. You know what I mean? It's like, and it's like, it's almost like those old Western movies, right? You know, that we used to watch as kids where, you know, the guy gets shot and the person like, don't fall asleep. You know, they're slapping a guy or whatever and tell him to stay awake, you know? And that's how I felt. It's like, I knew three things. I knew if I kept praying, I knew if they got me to a hospital, and I knew if I didn't fall asleep, I was going to live. Those three things had to happen. And I could tell you, so they're working on me. It seemed like a lot of time was, it seemed like it was taking way too much time, you know. And I remember, you know, Lieutenant Musgrove, who was, you know, more in a command staff over those homicide units, he was there, and he actually he was in charge of the. I knew he was a good guy. I knew him. He was on that major crime task force. He was, you know, leading that back when I was on that before getting to the cold case squad. And he's on the radio, and he's like, "Hey, it's gonna be all right, John." You know what I mean? And you know, different people are working on me. And now, look, my dad was a long dead at this point, right? Had been dead several years. My dad was, you know, medic or corpsman in the Navy in World War II, Pacific Island hopping campaign on all those beach landings with, you know, the Marines and stuff on an LST. And you know, he's dead, but I swear to God, you know, I heard his voice, you know, like I heard my father's voice at that moment, and he's like, "You got to get him out of here now!" Like shout, you know what I mean? And it's almost like they were taking too much time. It seemed like they were taking too much time. Time's ticking away. I feel like I'm drowning, and you know, I hear my dad's voice, and it's like, "You got to get him out of here now!" Screaming, you know. And right then they put me on like a sheet. They drag me over to a sheet, and they all get, you know, like probably 6 guys, you know, get on 3 on each side, and they start running me down the hallway to a back elevator. And then as the elevator doors open, there's a paramedic, you know, stretcher, you know, thing there. Put me on there. They take me down to, you know, I come out the Indiana Avenue side. It is like one of those glorious Washington, D.C. days. There's not a cloud in the sky. It's cold, you know. It's like probably 40s, 50s. It's November, but it's like beautiful, not a cloud in the sky. Unlike Pittsburgh, it's always cloudy, you know, partly Pittsburgh, chance of showers. But it's this beautiful, you know, sun shining, and they get me into an ambulance, and there's a sergeant, I don't recall his name, but he rides up there the whole way with me. And he you know, he's talking to me the whole time, you know, don't fall asleep. And we're talking, and you know, I think at that point they had some type of respirator on me, but I just could not. I could not breathe, and I was so tired. I so wanted to go to sleep, but I knew the minute I closed my eyes, I'm a goner. They got me up to Washington Hospital Center, which is up on North Capitol Street. That's a pretty good drive, you know. And you know, they get me up there, and I get into the operating room, and it's a sad commentary on what Washington, D.C. was at that point, because it was peacetime. There was no Afghanistan. There was no Iraq. There was no, you know, endless wars that we've been involved in over the last however many years, since 2001. And the Walter Reed medical doctors in the Army and the Bethesda Naval Hospital doctors during that time period, in order to get combat field experience, were going into the DC hospitals. They were going into Washington Hospital Center, George Washington, DC General, and they were getting their experience on how to operate and how to triage and how to work on gunshot patients. Yeah, that day I was lucky enough. I had the Bethesda, and you talk about fortuitousness and God looking down on me, having a guardian angel. But you know, that day I had the Bethesda Naval Hospital doctors, I believe, that were working on me in the OR room, and I was having such a hard time. I knew it was like, I remember Guy Middleton, Detective Guy Middleton. He actually, we had gone out on that, you know, like maybe a week before, and we had you know, did that interview in that bank heist, the armored car cases. You know, he's there. He gives me a thumbs up. You know, he's on the radio. He sees me, gives me a thumbs up. You know, he's sent to the hospital, and I remember them they stuck a tube down my throat, and it's like immediate relief. You know what I mean? I didn't feel like I was drowning anymore. You know, I guess it's like some type of intubator tube or something they stuck down, you know, looking back. But and it's freezing. I was shivering cold, you know, I guess probably because of the blood loss or whatever. And they put these like hot, almost felt like hot, wet towels, but they weren't wet. But they put these hot towels all over me. And they start wheeling me into the OR. And they came down with this big round like cup mask. And they went to put over my face. And I stopped them. And I said, "Is it okay that I go to sleep now?" And they're like, "Yeah, you can go to sleep." Many hours of surgery. I think it was probably 12 hours of surgery. They triaged my leg, and I later got that operated on, and rods and pins and 9 yards, and years later, multiple surgeries on. That's actually the thing that caused me the most problems. But they thought, I mean, they said to my wife that they'd probably have to amputate my leg, but at a minimum, I'd never walk again. I took the fit test in the bureau all the way up until I retired. You know, completed it, passed it, whatever, for my age range. Yeah,
good man.
And you know, and so but the other thing that came out is Dr. Bikram Paul. Dr. Bikram Paul was head of surgery up there, and there's another Dr. Golakowski too. But Paul was the surgeon. Now, Dr. Paul, if Clinton was the president back in the day, and at the time, if there was ever an assassination attempt on the president, Paul was selected as the person that would operate on the president. You know?
Wow.
Yeah. So he was my doctor, right? You talk about, you know, right? So best of the best, you know. They cracked my chest. I'm cut from, you know, below my. I mean, when you look back at like how, and I'm sedated at this point, I'm under, but like when you look back at how what surgeons go through, you know, with bullet holes and things like that. I mean, it's almost like they use like implements from the Middle Ages. You know what I mean? They spread they open up your rib cage and you're wide open.
It's called the chest spreader. They crack your chest. They spread it open to get to your heart.
Chest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cut through your sternum. And, at one point, you know, my heart stopped beating. What they told me, what my wife afterwards, is Dr. Paul actually had my heart out of my chest in his hands, and he was massaging it to keep it, you know, going and the blood flow. And I mean, it's just, you know, it's a miracle of modern science, as well as I think it's just you know, man, I think the dear Lord was looking down on me. It wasn't my time to go.
Well, Murph, you've said it before, brother. It was not your day to die.
That's right.
Yeah. No, I was heavily sedated and couldn't know this, but I do remember it. You know, it's like one of those things. It's almost like shadows, but I could see it to this day. You know what I mean? It's like when they brought me out of the operating room, it's like all my squad mates, everybody I'd worked with, they're like lined up, you know, on both sides of the hallway, and they pulled me out, and that did happen, and I did see it. They said I couldn't have, but you know, and talked to people afterwards. I remember, you know, people, you know, getting down on my face and saying stuff, and you know, as I'm coming out. And then when I came to, my wife was there at my bedside in the intensive care. I was in intensive care probably. I got out right before Christmas. This is November 22nd. I got out about a month to the day. I think December 21st or 22nd. I got out. I was back on the job in a limited duty capacity in first week of April. And then I went over the U.S. Attorney's Office for close to 2 years as a special assistant U.S. attorney. I started out in the specials unit and then moved to general crimes in the Eastern District of Virginia. And as a U.S. attorney, assistant U.S. attorney with a badge and a gun, and I prosecuted cases over there in the general crimes unit.
Let's back up a little bit too, because there's a lot more than just again, there's a lot to this. It's the recovery. Getting shot is one thing. Yeah.
Yeah, let me tie it in with the why this happened and how it happened, and crossroads of history or whatever, and why I think Rayful Edmonds is important, and the guy that brought crack cocaine to Washington D.C. and responsible for the violence, and the fact that I had a little part of that case and worked that for a number of months before getting over to C21, probably working for a year before getting to C21, but the First and Kennedy Street crew. Okay, the shooter in this case is a person by the name of Benny Lee Lawson. Benny Lee Lawson was part of this gang. He grew up in DC, and then his parents moved out to the suburbs. They were able to get out. I think his parents at some point got divorced, and you look at, like, I just wanted to talk to his mother, actually, and I haven't been able to get in touch with her, find her on the internet and stuff. But I believe, when I look at like old reports, like I know the Bureau went out and talked to her. I'm not sure that they really did an adequate interview. Like, I'd really like to, just to know. I mean, I think she was a Christian. She tried to talk her son from not going back and going down there. But he, like all these guys that get, hooked up in the allure of evil, the fast money, the fast times. He's running with the gang, moves back down to live with his father in Northeast DC. He is running with the gang. DC police roll them up on a search warrant. They're involved in, not necessarily, they haven't pinned anything to him necessarily, but they're involved in incredible amounts of violence, gang violence, controlling their drug trade on the First and Kennedy Street little area. And there's a neighboring gang up the street on the next block who would encroach on their territory, and they would get in running gun battles and fights. And like I said, members of the First and Kennedy Street crew were responsible for killing that poor woman sitting at the traffic light with her kids in the back of the car. She's dropping them off at daycare one morning, and I mean, it's just the havoc that was going on. So Benny gets locked up with other gang members, and he goes down to Lorton, gets convicted of gun charges when DC does a raid, and they seize a bunch of firearms and stuff right prior to them conducting a retaliation type hit on a rival gang. Benny gets out of jail probably in the summer of 94, and this incident happened November of 94. His mother tries to convince him, as the story goes, to, she tries to, work through the good Lord to keep him on the straight and narrow and keep him under wraps. And he rolls back with the gang, who is his family, and he goes back to running with the gang and getting involved in the drug trade back on First and Kennedy and being part of that. And it was October of, so a month before the shooting, October of 94, the First and Kennedy Street crew target a gang member, the rival drug dealer, who, is I guess, like, who was it? Was it Biggie Small? What was the guy's name? Or NWA, or one of those groups? I remember there was a rap song back in the day. It was like the 10 Commandments of drug dealers, And this guy, the words of the song are like what the 10 Commandments are, and one of them is you don't flash your cash, you don't let other people know. And this guy was, the gold teeth and the flashing the cash and letting people know that he's holding money and stuff like that. So this drug dealer that they target, First and Kennedy Street crew target, is laying his head down with this girl, and this girl is living with her grandfather up in Northeast DC. And she's living with her mom, and the daughter of the grandfather and another dude. And they start, they're predators, right? They target this drug dealer, and they see him one day. They follow him, and they figure he's holding drugs or money, and they follow him up onto the porch when he's coming to go see the girlfriend who's living with Grandpa. Grandpa's like salt of the earth guy. He's a retired postal worker, 80 some years old, pretty much lives in an upper floor. And, actually was, the evidence shows he was reading a Bible, and they bum rush the guy. They as he's opening the door, they rush in after him, and they do a home invasion. They put mom, granddaughter, girlfriend of drug dealer, and the other guy on the floor. They line them up, they pistol whip, they beat the crap out of this drug dealer. Where's your stuff? Where are you hiding? They ransack the house downstairs. They're looking for the drugs. He's not holding anything. He's not holding any drugs or money. One of the gang members, Daly Lawson's there, one of the gang members pulls out his pistol and boom, 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 boom. All right. They kill drug dealer, shoot him in the head. Girlfriend, shoot her in the head. Mom plays dead, and the other dude plays dead. They don't actually die. And then as they're running out the back door, grandpa's coming down the steps. Here's the commotion. 80-some-year-old guy. He confronts them. They shoot him, kill him. Triple homicide. As they run out the door, Daly Lawson vomits. And then, they get back later on that evening. There's all points bulletin out about this triple homicide. It's, even in as bad as the city is, triples are, not all that frequent, right? So MPD field inquiries pulls them over in a vehicle, identify them, but, there's nothing to hold them. But, later, main homicide, that office on the other side of the building, get this investigation, and they're investigating them. They identify the First and Kennedy Street crew as the group that conducted the triple, and they start building their case. And one of the ways they figure Benny just out of jail, he's on probation, he has a lot to lose. They start leaning on him, and his dad brings him down several times for interviews. It's like they spent hours interviewing him. He never snitches, never coughs up any information. But every time he gets back after being interviewed by DC Homicide, the gang members start, basically, hey, Benny, you've been down DC Homicide. You've been talking to him for hours. You must be snitching. He tells him Benny Lee Lawson's no snitch. Yeah, Benny, you got no heart. You threw up after this triple. You're soft. You can't handle it. And then you're going down. What's DC Homicide talking about for so long? You must be snitching. Bailey Lawson says, I'm not. Bailey Lawson's no snitch. He picks November 22nd to prove he's not a snitch. Now, November 22nd is also the anniversary of the Kennedy assassination, right? He's from the First and Kennedy Street crew. There's lots of writings that came out afterwards, like when they did the search warrant and stuff like that, drawings of him like shooting police officers. This guy was like hell-bent on killing police officers. And actually in his distorted, mind that sought the path of evil over goodness, he decided to pick November 22nd as the day of the Kennedy assassination, the First and Kennedy Street crew, in honor of the First and Kennedy Street crew, to prove he's not a snitch. And he thought that, in some of his writings, he believed that, from that day forward, November 22nd would be the day that gangs would rise up throughout the country and kill police officers. So he dresses like a detective. He comes down to DC Police Headquarters on November 22nd. He enters the headquarter building, which is now called the Hank Daly DC Police Headquarter building. He walks unimpeded because it was a multi-use building at that time. There's no metal detectors, and like I said, it'd be like lightning striking on a sunny day to think that would happen there. And then he gets into the elevator and goes up to the third floor looking for main homicide, that mirror image office on the other side of the building for us, because they're the detectives that were investigating him. He so happens to get on the elevator with Mike Will's informants that are coming up to the cold case squad. He doesn't know them. They don't know him. They just happen to get on the elevator together. Bailey Lawson gets up. They get off. He's talking to these kids, Mike Will's informants. He says, hey, where's homicide? They say, we're going to homicide. Because these kids from the streets of DC who don't know any better, all they ever dealt with was Mike Will, and they think homicide is Mike Will, where Mike Will's office is, where I'm sitting, where Hank is, where Mike is, where Martha is. He follows them. He actually stops at main homicide, outside the front door of main homicide. Hey, isn't this homicide? Like, no, man, we're going to homicide, right? And continues to follow them down. Now, good, bad, indifferent, I don't know, but the carnage could have been a lot greater, because at that time, main homicide had members of the media there. They were doing a big press conference behind that door. Had he walked in there with a fully automatic machine pistol rigged with a 39 rounds in his magazine, had he walked in there, the carnage would have likely been a lot greater. And, because the place is filled with reporters, filled with news cameras. And that's why when there's some footage on, the cameras got to that scene like really quick, and then they closed the doors on them and stuff like that. But there was footage right there because there's a big press conference going on right around the corner from us. So he passes main homicide, follows the informants, 1D, 2D, 3D, past all the other homicide, unchallenged. Nobody thinks anything. Comes up to the cold case squad. That cipher lock is probably jammed open because people have been coming in and out, getting their lunches and things like that. They walk in the main room. They pass Martha. They come into that side room that me, Mike, and Hank are in. Walk through that makeshift kitchen. Is Detective Will in? That's what the kid's there for. He has nothing to do with Benny Lee Lawson. Then at that moment, Benny pulls out his machine pistol and opens up, and the rest is history. After the shooting with me, he went into the other room. As he was coming around the corner, Martha is responding and coming to us. Martha always had your back. Martha wasn't going to let her friends, fight it out by themselves. Yeah, she's responding. She's up from her desk. She has her firearm. She's tactically trained. She's coming up. She's outgunned, right? He at close range, as he's coming out that, and this is like, I'm talking seconds, right? He's coming out that door. You can't see over to what happened in that room. I don't know but she would have heard gunfire, and same thing, draws her weapon, starts to respond. He's coming out at close range and you figure a barrel on a Cobra M11's longer, so it's a faster bullet speed, does more damage, even though that's also a 9mm. He opens up into her, unloads, his remaining of his magazine into her, hits her fatally multiple times. She fires back, hits him multiple times, all non-fatal though. And then she, goes down, and then at some point during the melee, and I think forensically you could say that one of her bullets would have, hit the bottom of his plate holding the bullets in the magazine. His bullets go out, and are spread across the floor there. And then, so he takes her gun. She's dead or dying on the floor. He takes her gun. He turns it on himself and kills himself. That's probably when I'm starting to come through. I'm hearing this gunfire, not in my immediate area. It's going on in the other room. And then, that's kind of the rest of the story.
Hey,
and
John,
yeah,
real quick question about that, because they're doing the research on this. There was, not say dispute, but there were a couple of different theories. Did he actually kill himself? I don't know what information came out later, because the shot was through the front of the forehead, committing suicide. And that's one of those, there was a theory that says, look, That's not normally how you do it. It's the side of the head. Is there any indication that it was one of uh, her rounds that did it, or somebody else's rounds that killed him, or did the information come out later that he took his own life?
The information I always had was he took his own life. I mean, that's what the final, shooting review group came up with. I mean, the scene was stepped on, but I mean, by everything that I've ever read, is that he killed himself.
That's what a coward does.
And he killed himself. He killed himself with her gun. So I don't know any other. You know what I'm saying? If he killed himself with her gun, I see what you're saying. Yeah. How else could I mean? I guess I think the gun was in his hand or immediately near his hand and far enough away that I don't see how forensically
It could have been anything else. Yeah.
Yeah, it could have been anything else. But
But
at
to your
that
point,
point,
Steve, that's the chicken shit's way out.
Yep. He's nothing but a coward.
and I mean, maybe suicide by cop before that. Before there was suicide by cop, who knows what was going on? So in the postscript of this, look, we're a law enforcement family, a bureau family. I mean, everybody, the bureau, we didn't know what was going on. Obviously, I'm heavily sedated in the hospital, but my wife, bore the brunt of everything and going to the funerals and, all that. And then, just dealing with things. But the bureau was phenomenal as far as, round the clock had agents in the house. And then when I got out of the hospital, I know some guys came and they built like a walk, plywood walkway to get the wheelchair up and stuff like that. But, it was, there's also a continuum in there too, because right afterwards there was shortly thereafter, there was a police assassin going around, shot police officers, killed Officer John Novobilski, Prince George's County. That culminated in May of '95, right? Totally unrelated, but no one knew until, again, the cold case squad got that one. I wasn't on at that point, but the cold case squad got that case and took it to finality where they got that shooter, and Jerry Bammel, who was on the squad with me, he engaged him. He killed Billy Christian, who was SWAT trained FBI agent on the surveillance when they were swooping in and doing the arrest. And that's back before Triggerfish was like, you can only tell what quarter of a cell phone tower somebody was hitting off of. It's not the technology they have today. But, geolocating, they knew he was out there. They knew he was running around, and he snuck up on Billy Christian and unloaded on Billy Christian and killed him. And then Bammel, got in a shootout with him. And again, though, the wild thing on that case is, I think Bammel hit him fatally in the final shootout. But as he's laying there dying, he had Officer Novobilski's gun and he killed himself. That shooter, a totally different shooting, but it kind of was a continuum of like the year of living dangerously in Washington, D.C.
Let's circle back for a little bit, because you mentioned something at the very beginning, and I want to talk about that. Your wife was a blood donor for you. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, look, my wife's the reason why I'm in the FBI. She whipped me into shape, always supported me throughout, and and gave up a career. I think it came full circle. I mean, now she's a federal judge, so we're very proud of her. But I mean, she made a lot of sacrifices along the way and put up a lot of crap. So and she is a universal blood donor. When I was lost blood, I mean, it's one of her pints that maybe more pints that went into me, and got me back to health. And then the rest is kind of history. So I'm still here.
Fantastic.
Through the grace of God.
Absolutely, by the grace of God. That's I don't think we've said this in other podcasts, but I don't think we say it enough, that the things that we go through as law enforcement professionals are dangerous. We knew that going in the job. Thank God that you survived this ordeal. But the true heroes are our families, because they have to put up with all this. So you're in a hospital, you're zonked out, whether they've got you on morphine or whatever for the pain. They're awake and they're dealing with this psychologically as well as literally, physically, helping you out, keeping the family running, all the responsibilities that you have as a parent, as a spouse, as a human being. She's got her own job, and I'm hoping her job gave her plenty of time off to be there with you. So, love the fact that you survived it, but man, we just don't recognize our families, especially our spouses, what they go through when something like this happens. God bless them all.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm probably more guilty than anybody. Yeah.
Yeah. Same thing with the military families, first responder families. When you go to work, one of the very few jobs, you don't know if you're coming home, or you don't know how long it'll be before you come home. You just never know. Hey, let's roll back just a little bit, John, because I want to ask you about some of the aftermath too. When were you first aware? And look, Murph, you started this too, so we're just going to do a quick dedication. We want to make sure we get the names out.
Yes.
It was Sergeant Hank Daly. He was 51. FBI agent Martha. Now you said Dixon, but on the news it says Martinez. Did she get married or?
Yeah, she had just been married. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I said I always known her as Dixon. You know what I mean? But yeah.
FBI agent, Special Agent Martha Martinez, and then FBI Special Agent Michael John Miller.
Yeah.
Look, I mean, both Mike was 36, Martha was 35, Hank was 51. You think about the years of service. So we make this episode dedicated in their names as well. But let's roll back a little bit too, from a recognition standpoint. You knew the shooting was going on. You saw Hank. When did you know about everybody who'd been killed that day? When was the first time you learned about everything?
No, so I was actually in my hospital bed, and I remember, I remember Jeff Bedford came in, who was on the squad, still close friend, and that my biggest concern, and you're always worried about crossfire, and I look back at I want to talk about that for a second too, because Martha, she's outgunned, right? She is 16 round magazine like we do, close range, getting a shootout with somebody with fully automatic. You have semi-automatic, but the other thing is too is police, people want to armchair quarterback, and all they know about policing is what they see on TV, and a lot of bad stuff and a lot of false narratives through the media and all this negative police stuff going on. But you have, it's a shoot or don't shoot situation. You have to worry about crossfire. You have to worry about what's behind you, and I'll go back to Martha, right? You got this. She's responding. She knows she's there. She's not leaving her friends behind. She's coming to our assistance, right? She has to not only worry about shooting the shooter, right? But you got a makeshift, basically wall made out of rug. You don't know where we're at. You don't see us behind there. You don't. So she has to, have a lot of trigger discipline as far as, and that was probably to her detriment, right? Could have led to her death, what I mean? That she has to worry about, not just, she didn't have the,
she didn't have the luxury the shooter had. He didn't care. He just shot everywhere.
Shot everywhere, shot everyone. She's got to worry and have that trigger discipline to not, her shots had to count, and had they gone through, could or couldn't have hit us, on the other side of that wall. So that's point number one. But I'm sorry, I got off on it. So as far as I'm sorry, what was your question again?
It's just really about at what point did you know about Hank and Martha and Michael?
So my biggest fear too is you're worried about crossfire. I knew Mike was off to the right, but in the direction of the shooter. You know what I mean? My biggest concern was always hey, what, my God, I hope, none of my, you live with that. None of my shots, could have hit Mike, which they didn't. But, I mean, that's just what you have to worry about and then I came to in the hospital, and I couldn't speak, as Jeff Bedford retells the story, and I forgot completely about this. We did this in the Martha dedication, but I remember I wrote, who died, because I know, it wasn't a matter of if, I know what I saw, you know what I mean? And then, Jeff was the one that told me, and it just, devastating, to this day, I mean, you think about it, and, to this day, I mean, it's a huge loss, you know what I mean? But, you don't dwell on it. You move along and you move past it. But That's young lives that had a lot, the best of the best, the way they lived their lives, were just good, and snuffed out early. But again, it's in the cause of freedom, I guess, and which I go back to. Freedom isn't free, you know,
Absolutely.
and this whole false narrative out there that this is such a rotten country, and I mean, there is no. I've been around the world. I've been in some pretty awful places. The Bureau actually sent me to probably some of the worst places, you know. But for the time in London where I hit the lottery on that one. But you see how other countries, other systems of justice run, even in the Western world, man. There is nowhere. I mean, the founders perfected it, right? The best system that could be perfected, and we're still perfecting it. And it's not, there's injustices and things like that, but at its heart, the American system of government, the American system of rule of law, the American system of rights is the best. And I just see people are willing to toss so easily. The uneducated masses, or those that don't know history, are so willing to toss it for a little bit of security and um, for what else is out there. And the other systems that are out there are not our system, and are not nearly as good as our system.
Right. And a lot of these people that are spouting this rhetoric, which is nothing more than, their personal narrow-minded positions, have never experienced anything outside their little world. They haven't been to a third world country. They haven't been to a war zone. They echo what they hear other people say without doing their own research, and a lot of times without even personal experience. They just think, oh, this is the cool thing to say. And not to go political here, but I got to say it, our politicians waver with public opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that Rayford case is a perfect example. The man's got 2 life sentences, and they commute it to time served.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
pathetic what we're going through right now. But we've been, Morgan and I have done a couple of Patreon episodes on our opinions on things like that, and we put it right here too, man. This is the whole purpose of having Game of Crimes on this out here on the podcast airwaves, is so that our listeners can learn about the heroic actions of those who will put others before themselves. Did you intend to go in? Did you know you was going to be in a shooting that day? Of course not. No, none of us ever think we're going to be in a shooting unless we're making a proactive raid on a situation. You just thought it was going to be another day in the office there. But you guys didn't run away. You stood the ground. You raised your swords and you protected freedom. Man, I mean, I could get on my soapbox here and bore everybody to death with my personal opinions, but let me just end this little diatribe here that I'm on with
Usually
saying,
I'm the
God
one that's
bless
on
you
it, but
guys.
Murph has
I love
overtaken
it,
me
man.
on this one.
Good.
Well,
Good.
God bless it for you guys, for what you stood for the sacrifices that you and your families were willing to make and did make for everybody else's freedom. And everybody that's, I think our listeners are pretty much pro law enforcement. And we know that we've converted some people over to at least look at it from the other person's position. Whether you're still pro law enforcement, or you're still, on the fence, whatever, these are the kind of freaking heroes that are out there every day risking their lives, and their families are just as much backed up against the wall because they don't know if we're going to come walking back through that door or not. But if you ask my wife, she'll tell you, if I got killed in the line of duty, I was doing what I felt was right and what I wanted to do. And you got to have that support.
Yeah. And John, brother, you never get over it, but you do get through it. People say, well, there is no, closure is a myth. There's no such thing as closure. You'll never get back to the day before. There's no such thing as that. But what you do is you do get, you are able to move forward at some point because you get resolution. And the resolution was, the guy's dead. He's no longer a threat, but you've got 3 heroes now. That died because somebody decided that that was their day to die. It's like, hey, I'm going to, I'm part of a gang. I didn't like the way I was treated. All about a perceived reputation that they thought he was a snitch. So what does he do? He kills 3 people to prove he's not a snitch. It seriously injures you. But we could go off on that for a long time. But I want to bring it back to, you mentioned a couple of things, because we ran it. First time I'd heard the term in a long time was Keith Cregan, Steve, where he was a SALSA, a special
Yeah.
assistant U.S. attorney. So
Yeah.
you came out of that, and you're trained as a lawyer. You've obviously have done the legal work before. So tell me about what it was like to not be able to go back to doing what you were doing and moving into this role, being a special assistant U.S. attorney. Like you said, you're a badge carrying, gun carrying attorney. You can clear your own cases. I mean, there's some
Well,
advantages to that.
conflict, you couldn't. I
Well, let's
couldn't
not think
do
about
anything I
that.
worked on. But no, I mean, it was. I'll tell one funny story from that. Gary Pontecorvo, he was on the. I think he retires in ASAC out of New York, but he was on the drug squad. And you guys all know this, right? So the worst thing an AUSA can do, assistant U.S. attorney, I'm using acronyms, but the worst thing is call you my agent, right? You know what I mean? It's like, I hated that, right? It's like, I'm not your agent, right? We're equals with different roles in
No,
the,
you're
in the
my
government.
prosecutor. That's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. But I mean, the my agent thing, you know what I mean? So I'm over there. I'm pulling FBI cases. I'm pulling customs cases back before there's Homeland Security. Secret Service cases, bringing great like little fraud cases and stuff like that. And it was a tremendous program. What they did is they take you 6 months and they send all these DOJ attorneys with no trial experience, and they run them through the specials unit. And then you start out doing magistrate court. In DC, it's really busy because you have the George Washington Parkway, so it's petty drug offenses, it's DUIs, it's everything to the state because it's on federal land. It's like state crimes, but what would be on federal lands because of the jurisdiction there. And then afterward, your second months, like I ran mag court, the magistrate court, a team of SASAs, and we you did DUI cases and all this, and then you had and then you start pulling felonies, and then by your last 2 months of that 6 months, so at month 5 and 6 you are doing felonies. And then because I was limited duty, Helen Fahey was the U.S. attorney, and I was pulled up to the general crimes unit, where that's the bank robberies, the child pornography cases, the serious, I mean, not that wasn't serious on the SASA case, but that's like getting your teeth cut as a new baby AUSA. And then, got up to general crimes and was part of general crimes unit, which was just amazing. But the cool thing was, it's like I was taking cases from guys I knew, you know what I mean? And I remember we had one trial, and Gary was like, everybody hated, like, if you were called by an AUSA, my agent. And I would always dig it in with these guys. Hey, my agent. You know what I mean? Everybody came in as my agent.
My brother, my agent.
Because
I could
sure
get away
you never
with it.
got the finger, did you?
Yeah, I got away with it. But the beauty of it was, we had just finished a drug trial. This guy got like 27 years. This is a fascinating case Gary brought, and it was I forget the guy's name. Pooh Jones, I think the guy's nickname was Pooh, P-O-O-H.
Oh no, we got the nickname of all time. Steve, remember it from our Patreon episode, Doo-Doo Butt.
Doo-doo butt.
His nickname was Doo-Doo Butt.
I love it. But this is a great case. They were running. They had this. They called it a box. Like, they would have these mechanical boxes that they would hide the cocaine in, and they would they would. They were going up to New York or somewhere, and they were getting these people to put these like hydraulic hidden boxes in these cars. And like, it was pretty, you'd have to turn like the air conditioner on, turn the radio on, hit the AM button, and then this thing would open. Like, they had all these different like circuits would have to be touched for them to do that.
All the concealed traps that they have in there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, the cool thing is, like, you think about like little things that make a case, but there was a Prince George's County canine officer that pulled him over, and the dog hit, but they could never find the drugs in this vehicle. And then later, search warrants, stuff like that, they got it and they arrested the guy. But I used that canine officer as a witness during the conspiracy trial to show that, this guy was carrying drugs, and he had witnesses that said that day, he was cooperators that said, and it was corroborated by, the drugs weren't found, but the canine officer's dog hit on it. You know what I mean? That was part of the testimony. But it's just neat. But I remember, so we're waiting for the jury to come out, and there was some question from the judge I remember that judge. I can't. He's. I think he's probably deceased by now, but he's old time. Real thick. Southern accent. And Gary and I are sitting at the table. At the where the U.S. Attorney's office sits closest to the jury, and in the old federal courthouse, which is now NCMEC, I think, but that's the old federal National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. But that was the old federal courthouse in Alexandria, or maybe that's.
Yeah, no, that's it. I've been down there. A friend of mine just retired as the executive director, John Clark. It's
Okay.
pretty area,
Yeah, but that was the old federal courthouse before they built, the new one. And we're sitting there, and I remember the judge saying, "Mr. Kuchta, have your agent run down to the U.S. What they needed something or other," and he's like, "Have your agent." So I'm like, "Yes."
She told you you're my agent.
Yeah, you're my agent, Gary. Gary's like this big, muscular, like power lifter guy. I never let him live that down. My agent.
Come here, son.
Come here, son. Hey.
But no, that was a tremendous experience. I got to try felony. I had like over 30 felony pleas. I negotiated grand jury practice, indictment cases. He did suppression hearings. And I actually had the opportunity to stay, but I wanted to get back in the bureau. Sometimes I think about, but hey, it was a great experience, and I loved every minute of it.
Let's talk about that glide path because you were still rehabilitating. How long did it take before you were able to actually resume your duties, before you were at the point where you were physically capable of carrying those out?
So I got off a limited duty in December of '96, and
we're talking over 2 years after the shooting.
Yeah. And then back then, Louis Freeh was the director, and the doctors basically said, "Look, that was my ticket back to Pittsburgh. We'd gone back. We looked at homes in Pittsburgh, but, it broke my wife's heart. But basically at the time, and, I can handle that weather now, but at that time, medically, the doctor's like, look, you need preferably a hot, wet climate, hot, humid climate, or somewhere dry out west, but you going back to Pittsburgh at this time would be.
Is that just because of the cold and the injuries? It would just aggravate them and make
arthritis would set in early, and that was their thing. And I've had multiple surgeries. I have bone grafts. I'm not going to bother you with it, but I mostly on my leg, and that's really what's given the most issues through the years. But so that's why we came down kind of sight unseen and stayed in the RA, and eventually got over to London, and now retired. But
so when you said stay in the RA, which resident agency?
Fort Myers.
Okay.
Fort Myers RA. Yeah.
Tough place to be.
Yeah, tough place.
Yeah. Yeah. We had our own federal courthouse, our own U.S. Attorney's office. It was a good ride, man. And I ended up being SSRA out of that too.
When did you punch out of the bureau officially?
August of 18, and I really wasn't looking, and it was probably a bad season in my life. And I sometimes I look back, it's like, wow, I probably should have stayed in, but you can't do anything. Once you walk out the door, you can't get back in. But I wasn't looking. I got a call from I was 55, and it's 57 mandatory retirement. Although now they're letting people stay to 60 if you could pass the fit test and have a good conduct and stuff like that. But I was probably really where I wanted to be. I had and then I got a call from a guy I used to work with in Washington Field, and hey, looking, got this great corporate job, and blah blah blah. And I went through the interview process, and it was it looked good, and then it was like ended up being like 80% of my time I was like traveling overseas, which, I left there after about 2 years, but, it just wasn't a good fit. And where I'm at now, it's awesome. I'm at a really great aerospace company that treats me like gold,
Fellow Floridian, just so you know.
Yeah.
So, about a mile from Murph. Hey, but I'm interested in your tour of duty in London.
Yes.
As the ALAT. By the way, I got to tell you, I ran into some of your legal attaches over in Pakistan and Turkey. And and actually, just by way of reference, in 2012, I was the senior law enforcement advisor for the Republican National Convention. I spent 6 months between Tampa and St. Pete, and working on that stuff down there. It just was fun to work with everybody. One of the funnest things, I have the challenge coin. We got to go over to a classified briefing over at CENTCOM, MacDill Air Force Base.
Yes.
And
been there plenty of times.
got to go into the room. There's called the CPOC, the Central Point of Command, and then the FPOC, the Forward Point of Command. We went into the room. Phones come up out of the table. General points towards it, says that's the phone that launched Operation Neptune Spear. So had the chance to touch that phone. I walked around for 6 months saying, "Hey, smell my finger. It's the smell of freedom." I didn't wash my hand for 6 months, but but I'll tell you what the honor was. Had a chance to meet a Medal of Honor winner. He was down part of the group that we were with, but great area, and it's a great area that you're down there. But how did you end up? I mean, you love that. So if you wanted to stay away from the cold and and the stuff, what were you doing in London then? Because London could be fun, but it can be cold and dreary a lot of times.
Yeah, London's is a cold and dreary place. However, like the people are awesome, man. And I mean, I can't say enough good things. Plus, I got a great son-in-law out of the deal, so I couldn't have picked a better guy for my daughter. But
is he British?
Yeah, he's British. He's British. He's he's South Londoner, man. But
knock me up against Wall Street mouth with a putty knife, sir.
It was kind of like a comparative law study too, because we both came out of like the common law system, but we went kind of different ways. I mean, but we kind of we're a lot alike, but there's a lot of differences, and just working with British policing, just the way they do it, and they don't really have an FBI. They kind of tried to create this national crime agency, but it was like it's really strange. It's really like New Scotland Yard, which is the London Metropolitan Police Service, right? They're London and the boroughs surrounding London and that like M25 beltway kind of thing. They also are in charge of counterterrorism, right, for pretty much the whole country.
SO 15.
Yeah, SO 15, exactly. And then so it's like really an FBI role. So you dealt with like them on certain things, and like they handled overseas fugitives and stuff like that. So you dealt with them on that. City of London, which is like it's only 1 square mile, but the city is like Wall Street, right? And they also have jurisdiction for like a lot of your high end white collar and corporate fraud and things like that the FBI is involved in. They have nationwide and even some international jurisdiction because they have their yeah, and just like the FCPA and Foreign Corrupt Practice Act and like their own version of that, which is like goes back to like 1898, right? Their Overseas Bribery Act and stuff like that. So it was really kind of just trying to figure it out and work with them. But I was the criminal attaché, and so anything coming from the U.S. to them, I would assist them if they needed things from the U.S. I would do that. And there's like no marshal service over there, so I was like the conduit with the marshal service. Securities and Exchange Commission doesn't have an attaché, so I was the conduit for them to get things done. But it's the bureau really expanded overseas. Although London, Mexico City, and Canada were the 3 original overseas offices. And I mean, the London office dates back to World War II when the original legate came over on a merchant marine vessel during World War II, ducking torpedoes, had to get dropped up in Scotland and make his way down. But like you look at the history there, like they that first legate's experience, when you read about it, and there's like books written about this guy, but they had they were getting bombed, by the those Beazle bug bombs and stuff that just came like where they were living, got bombed and stuff during World War II. But like his first experience, he was met, coming off the train after this long, arduous journey to get over there, and he's met by who? A Metropolitan Police officer who takes him home, and they have dinner with his wife and family, and that's how it was over there. I mean, the Brits are just amazing, amazing partners. It's our best partner in the whole world. And I mean, I just got tremendous friendships built out of that. But you're all cops, and you get the job done, and you get done with each other. And it's not like some of these other, 3-letter agencies that have these like black budget. Dude, we had nothing. I mean, everything is on your personality, right? It's coming out of, you got to go out, the beer's done, not like people are like drunkards or anything like that. I don't want to give that impression, but like, here it's over golf or like lunch or something like that. Business gets done. Over there, it's over a pint at the pub, and the pub goes back to the public house back in the Middle Ages or even before that, because they had to ferment their water to drink it or that die. I mean, so it's like this long.
The folks can't see this. I'm going to show this up to you. So if you can see that, tell me if you can see that, John. It's kind of like it's a Christmas party with SO15. That was Graham Birch. That is, and
Yeah,
then
it's
this
awesome.
is us. This is us at midnight. Graham is drunk as shit, leaning up against the light pole. Alan's holding him up. We had those guys on our episode. They still blame me today because I drank 2 Englishmen under the table. Graham fell down 15 feet from his house and broke 2 fingers on his left hand. I said, "Good thing you guys don't carry guns." Alan was so drunk he left his coat on the subway and it drove off with his keys in his pocket. So he's knocking on the house at 1 o'clock in the morning, making his wife very happy. But no, they were a great bunch of guys. Had a Christmas party with those. But my favorite story about the FBI in World War II came from a J. Edgar Hoover memo, because J. Edgar was very particular about everything. You got to look the part, got to do the stuff. And they wrote a memo about they were worried about Nazi infiltration and maybe some espionage. And he sent the memo back and he said, "Watch the borders." So they assigned a bunch of agents to go watch the borders, only to find out 6 months later he meant watch the borders of the memo. Don't write outside the borders of the memo.
I believe it. I believe it. He also he went into an office somewhere no, it's yeah. Because no one would question the emperor, right? I mean, everybody
Yeah,
was,
right.
he was surrounded by sycophants probably, and everybody's afraid to say anything. But like the no pinheads, right? That he went into one office and there was somebody had a smaller hat, so therefore a smaller head size than back when they used to wear the hats in the 40s and stuff. And he came out with no pinheads, so whoever had a small head, I probably wouldn't get in today because I have a small head, but no pinheads.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons to not keep people out of the bureau.
Yeah, look, we've gone on a really big journey and stuff, but I kind of want to bring it down to we had a let's finish up with kind of a philosophical discussion, because we were starting to talk about that,
Yeah, sure.
and I finally had to put the time out and say, well, this is good stuff. We got to capture this. So you had some philosophical things you kind of wanted to discuss, because we're talking about, you gave that quote, those who forget the past are doomed to repeat it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of what we're going through right now. So I just wanted to kind of tee that up and let you riff with that for a little bit, because you have some insights very few people have. You were there when it was bad, you were there when it was good, and you've seen this line of history move. So just give us your closing thoughts about that.
Yeah, so let me just go with. I'll end and I'll build on a quote, right? And Sir Winston Churchill said, "No one pretends democracy is perfect or all wise. Indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except all those other forms of government that have been tried from time to time." And I think America, our government, our Constitution, which both of you and I took an oath to uphold and defend so many years ago, it provides the greatest system for protecting civil rights, individual freedom, and liberty. And this is the greatest form of government in world history. All right. Now, look, our system's imperfect, and we're still on that journey, to always make it better. But what I find that wasn't happening in 1994, okay, is the dangerous and false narratives that have taken root right now in this country. And it culminates in this false narrative that America and our constitutional form of government is somehow systemically racist, or the police are the enemy. And this narrative is being perpetuated by, I'm going to blame feckless politicians, right? Anarchists, as we saw, in 2019 and 2020. And, now there's this whole movement to defund the police that we've seen played out over the last couple of years. And this only serves to divide and destabilize a nation. Who's licking their chops during all this, right? Russia, China, Iran, name our enemy, right? And is there really any wonder that lawlessness, civil disorder, violent crime, murder rates are skyrocketing in the cities and towns that vilified law enforcement? I mean, have you been to LA or San Francisco lately? I have. It's compared to what it used to look like. San Francisco, Paris on the Pacific, most beautiful architecture. It's beyond third world what's going on there. and the level of crime and violence, it's played out by the statistics, and this decline in support for law enforcement amongst primarily our government officials and now in pop culture, it's had serious ramifications nationwide. The FBI reported last year 50% rise in law enforcement officers assaulted and killed in the line of duty in the 1 year period. Think of that number. 50% law enforcement assaulted and killed in the line of duty between last year and this year. Any of you have friends in law enforcement, that recruiting is woefully low nationwide. People are leaving. They're either retiring early, or they're just getting out, or they're going to departments that, do back the police, or places where prosecutors exist that, that stand up for police officers and will have their back. But, they're leaving law enforcement in droves. And, uh, we can't forget, right? We talk about the thin blue line, right? But there's a very, very thin blue line that separates anarchy from ordered liberty. And the last time this country danced with this soft on crime devil was in the 1970s, and then peaking in the early 1990s with all those murder statistics I talked about, when our major cities were reduced to crime infested hellholes. And my message right now is going to be to the younger generation who've grown up in relative peace, stability, prosperity, and who never learned the lessons of the recent past. And my message is also to the members of my generation who forgot the lessons of the recent past. So those people sitting in big cities now, where the crime rates are starting to jack up, is just sit there in your outdoor cafe, sipping your latte in neighborhoods that were once crime-ridden killing fields. Recognize that the air of freedom you breathe today is not free. The comfort and security you enjoy was paid for with the blood, the sacrifice, and the lives of this generation and previous generations of men and women of law enforcement. Names like Michael John Miller, Henry Joseph Daly, Martha Dixon, Billy Christian, and those over 22,000 officers' names carved into the granite walls of the Law Enforcement Memorial in Washington, D.C. So that's my final word.
Amen, brother.
I couldn't have said it any better.
No.
And look, you're right. We've all been to funerals. We've all have friends whose names are on the wall. We all know what it takes, and we all know what it's like when they're gone. And the thing I like about what you said is we called out, if you want to see what impact policies can have when you have these policies, all you have to do is look at the homicide rate, what it was before these policies started and this narrative started and what they happened. And if you want to know what kills people, words kill people. When you use the words like it's been used, it changes the policy, it changes the attitudes. And now more people die in Philly, more people die in New York, more people die in DC. Do we not equate the value of their lives? I mean, that's the part that gets me is you don't have to put an R or a D behind it. There are feckless politicians, R, D, or I, out there. They need to grow. They need to pour some Miracle Grow in their lap, grow a pair for the men, I should say, and for both. But we've got to get back. We're not talking about a police state. You're just talking about where the safety and security of the public is the foundational element for living there. And I will tell you, to your point too, having been in a few foreign countries, I tell people, I said, if I'm ever going to get arrested and do time somewhere, I want it in the United States, because where else could you have appeal upon appeal? You could go to the Supreme Court. These things could happen. Every case has a chance to make it to the Supreme Court, considering the conditions. But look, been in Pakistan, been in Turkey, been in some, other countries, even you think, Steve, South America and Colombia, there's justice systems, but the way they do things there. Final word for me too, because I didn't say a whole lot because your story was so compelling. But Steve, I go back to the point of what you were made when we were interviewing you and Javier. The same thing with Chris and Dave on our Cali edition, is that people think that, we'll just send it to people there. They'll get it however they want, even if it's illegal, but we can use it in the United States. And the whole point is we can't use evidence unless it was obtained legally, even in another country. That's what the rule of law here. So my advice to some of you folks who don't like it is, name me one foreign country where their system of justice, that has been around as long as ours is better. Just name one country where it's better. And I will tell you, to your point, we're a work in progress. We will always be a work in progress. But again, I'm off my soapbox. That was not a digression, so you don't get to drink again on this game. That was an extenuation of his stuff. But John, I got to tell you, man, probably this is one of the episodes where the guest, you just articulated it so well. There was no need for me and Murph to interject anything. I think that's one of the longest stretches of narrative we've ever had on an episode. And just to listen to what you went through in that building, and just look, we could talk about politicians, Marion Barry, the fact that he didn't spend money. At the end of the day, it takes away from the sacrifice of Hank Daly, Martha Dixon, and Mike Miller. And that's who this episode is dedicated to. Into watch November 22nd, 1994.
And what that translates to, John, is you now hold the record for keeping Morgan quiet during a podcast interview on Game of Crime. So hats off to you, brother. Great job. And our listeners know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Sorry,
guys. It took an FBI agent to do that.
Well,
okay.
A lawyer. It took a lawyer.
John could not get onto the platform we're using. We had to make a change. Murph couldn't do it for him. It took him FaceTiming me to say, just click the little button in the upper left-hand corner. That's all it took. And all of this brain power couldn't figure out what little statey cop was able to do for them.
It's not FBI agent proof. Come on.
Well, and see, that wasn't a police officer challenge. That was a lawyer challenge. There's a lawyer side on you coming out.
Yeah, the other joke I like, only a lawyer can write a 100-page document and call it a brief. Thank you very much. So
that's good. I like that.
Hey, John, John, it's been a true honor to have you on here. We thank the good Lord above that you're still here with us today. Our hats go off to those killed in the line of duty, and especially to everyone's families. It's been a true honor to have you on here, man. I know we talked about to each other, a year ago, and we finally got you on here.
But you tell your wife how much we admire her too for doing what she did, supporting you. How many wives are down there sticking their arm out, putting a needle in there to take blood to save their husband's life, and so she gets a special salute from us as well.
And a little shout out to Jaime Camacho for following through and putting us together. An old friend, retired DE agent that we're both good friends with. So thank you, Jaime.
Thank you, Jaime.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I don't know Jaime, but thank you.
It's an honor and a privilege, but thank you. And thanks for getting the word out and keeping us going, because you're doing a tremendous service, I think, to the women and men of law enforcement.
Thank you, brother.
We're just a small voice. In fact, I'll use one of your famous Churchill quotes. Everybody said, they complimented him for, being the voice, of England, the roar. And he says, no, I'm trying to think the exact quote, but he basically said, I was not the Lion of England. I was not the roar. I only gave voice to the roar. He said what the English people were already famous for, that stiff upper lip, keeping their resolve, during World War II, the Blitzkrieg. So look, we're just simply a conduit for the voices of people like you, the other ones that have come before you and the other ones that will come later. But anytime you have somebody who's a survivor in a shooting and you realize what their story is, and the fact that 3 of your colleagues died that day in that room, defending freedom, like you say, if people just really would understand what was at stake then is the same thing that is at stake now. And if you think it's bad, you haven't seen bad till you've got 500 homicides a year, 700 and more than that here in the National Capital Region. If you want to start counting PG, Montgomery, those areas like that, it can get a lot worse, except for the fact you've got men and women willing to work shitty jobs for shitty pay, to work shitty hours, to do what? To go home at night and make sure that you go home at night. So I leave it at that.
God bless, brother.
This is me saluting you. People can't see this. Me saluting you, John Kuchta. If you were from Minnesota, it would be Ufta, but John Kuchta. We salute you, sir. You guys don't go anywhere. Everybody else that's listening, stay tuned for the debrief. Man, if you're not proud of somebody who has served their country like John Kuchta, I can't help you. I mean, and Steve, that is the most amazing thing you said. Shot through the heart, survives, the will to win. And like we said, it wasn't your day to die, brother. And he went on to do great things.
It is, and John is so humble about his experiences. He's not wanting to take credit for anything. I mean, he laid it out what he did there. I mean, he got off as many rounds as he could. Then, as he's shot and laying on the floor, he's still raising his hand up above the table, trying to get led down. We call it getting led down range, which you're trying to protect yourself and your fellow officers. He didn't know what was going on. The lady that was the FBI agent that was killed in there, he didn't know what her status was. She was in a different part of the room that couldn't see what was going on out front. So, quite honestly, man, I mean, you talk about an American hero, an American patriot. John Kuchta fills both of those slots with flying colors, man. Just as I said in the beginning, so proud to have him on the show.
And he was awarded the FBI's highest award you can give to an agent for what he did. And he should have, because John was still able to get off some rounds. He was still, even though critically wounded like he was able to return fire. I tell you, I'm humbled when I talk to people like that, because you go, Steve, the bad thing is they were working in an area that they thought they should have been relatively safe. Cipher lock on the door. Nobody's supposed to be in there. And they're working and stuff. But that just tells you budget cuts have an effect. They didn't have the proper security. So many other agencies were working in that building. This is why, hey, look, it's all it takes is one person to forever change the trajectory of many people's lives. So we dedicate this, again, like we say, Sergeant Hank Daly, 51, of the Washington Metropolitan Police Department, FBI agents Mike Miller, who was 41 at the time, and Special Agent Martha Dixon Martinez, 35. If there's any measure of justice, the chicken shit saved the taxpayers a lot of money.
He's done.
Yeah, he's room temperature. So
yep.
Enough with him. We will not mention his name again. But hey, hopefully you guys were inspired by this story. It was an honor to talk with John and do that. But hey, look, if you enjoyed this episode, just head on over to Apple and Spotify. Hit those 5 stars. Let people know what you think about it. Drop a comment in there. Let us know what else we can work on. Head on over to GameOfCrimesPodcast.com for more info about the show. We'll be updating it as we go along. Merch, books, things like that. Follow us on that social media at Game of Crimes on Twitter, at Game of Crimes Podcast on Facebook and the Instagram. PayPal.com. Just go over and use our email, gameofcrimespodcast@gmail.com, or paypal.me/Game of Crimes. Whatever makes it easier to you. But Murph, I can say it again real fast 3 times. Where you got to be, where you got to be, where you got to be.
Come and check us out on Patreon. Just give us a shot on this. See if you like the content we're putting on there. We're always open to suggestions. If you've got ideas that you think would be better, if you have different opinions than what we have on there, you're more than welcome to express those to us. We love hearing different opinions because we're not always right. I am, but Morgan, he's coming along. I'm working with him. But you know what? When we have
I thought I was wrong once, but I was mistaken. So
yeah. No, you weren't. But and here's the cool thing about it. We can have a difference of opinions and we can still be friends. So come over, check us out. Tell your friends about us. Come on over. We're trying to upgrade our equipment. I didn't realize podcasting was so expensive here. I think we're up to like 72 cents an hour now for all the time we're putting in. So,
but it is a labor of love.
It is. This is a blast. I never dreamt of doing a podcast. I'm having a blast doing this.
Well, if you want to keep me in the lifestyle of Tommy Bahama, please give till it hurts. No.
Yeah. Oh, well, and now I got to go the other way. If that's where the money's going, don't send us anything.
Hey, no, don't never say that. Anyway, guys, thank you guys for doing that. But really drop your comments in there. Make sure you go visit us out and also go visit our Game of Crimes fan group. Sandy Salvato will allow you entry if you just half-ass, at least try, give it a couple questions. Just get close. It's kind of like Murph. Just get close. That's close enough for government work.
That's right.
All right. Well, hey, guys, we want to bring this to a close. But again, we want to thank you once again for being our players out there and for playing the biggest, baddest, most dangerous game of all, the Game of Crimes.